welcome to Anchored with Grace, Judge Dweynie Paul.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be with you guys, to talk, share some ideas and things that's important in our community.
Well, thank you for coming on to our platform. Our platform is about Cynthia McKnight and myself. It's about encouraging people to tap into their God-given gifts that God has given them. And we know everybody has a gift. And so therefore, with that being said, what is your gift that you'll bring to this seat?
Okay, so to everyone, my name is Judge Dweynie Esther Paul. I'm a candidate for Kings County Surrogate Court. I'm a civil court judge now. I started in family court, and oftentimes my first role in this campaign has been educating people about what surrogates court actually is, because predominantly people are not aware. And in surrogates court, we deal with wills, trusts, and estates, and we make sure that everything that our loved ones worked for, whether they had a will or they did not, gets from one generation to the next. We also do guardianships of mentally disabled adults. We do guardianships of minors and adoptions. And you say anchored in grace, and the idea that everyone has something to contribute. So I'm a deacon at my church. I attend Mount Lebanon Baptist Church in Bedford Stuyvesant, and I believe in a purpose-driven life. Amen. And that idea that sometimes we go through trials and tribulations, bittersweet experiences, but if we let them pass and do nothing with the tools, the skills, the experience that we had, then it truly was in vain. And I don't really believe in coincidences. So sometimes when things happen, I think you are intended to use that as a tool. And usually it has nothing to do with you and everything to do with your ability and opportunity to serve someone else. And so when you say anchored in grace, and I think of a ministry that if you're a teacher, if you're an educator, that is your ministry. You are nurturing and educating lives and our future. If you're in the health field, then you are caring for the sick. And nursing them back to health. And so I'm in the legal field, so I feel like that is my ministry. And my journey to the bench started actually many years ago. I was very young. I was 9 years old. Mm-hmm. I had a brother. He went on a youth trip. He got in an accident and he never came home. And so I watched my parents after his death fight the court system to find justice for his life in a wrongful death suit. And at the same time, they were navigating and trying to figure out the best way how to raise me. And they went through family court. So I learned very young what it meant to have an advocate in the courtroom, an attorney, and really what it meant to have a judge who understood my experience of life. If that judge was going to really make the right decision for me, my family, and ultimately the community. And so I stayed on that path to going to law school, and ultimately, by the grace of God and the support of the community, becoming a judge in 2015. And surrogates court has everything to do with our family's legacy and preserving intergenerational wealth. And I started in family court. I was an acting Supreme Court justice for 4 years there. I'm in civil court now for 2 years, and I'm looking to bring all those experiences with me to surrogates court.
That's great. So tell us a little bit more about surrogate court and how it can benefit our community.
Absolutely. And so oftentimes I mentioned before that may not have even heard about surrogates court. We might be familiar with criminal court, family court, civil, but never even heard about surrogates court. And now that the pandemic struck the community, and I will say it struck the community in disproportionate numbers in communities of color. And so we are really at the doorsteps of surrogates court right now, looking for the resources and what surrogates has to offer to make sure that we can close out and transition from one generation, from one family's assets, and transfer them over to the next family. And, oftentimes what happens is when people want to prey on the community, they actually go to surrogates court, because the information in surrogates court is public. So you can identify who passed away, what assets they owned, and you can identify who the family members are, because there's something called an heirs locator. So you can do research and find out what property they owned and who the family members are. And oftentimes in our community, we deal with deed theft, tax and water liens, foreclosure, things that really look to rob our communities of their wealth. Oftentimes we may be, what I say is cash poor, but asset rich. We live together, mother, father, aunts, uncles, siblings, to make ends meet. And we might be that first generation of homeowners, and the idea that we lose our wealth when we go through that process of our families transitioning, because oftentimes we don't plan for death. We don't even want to talk about it. Mm-hmm. This pandemic, if it has done nothing else, has taught us so many things about what's really important in life. And so we really should take advantage of the time we have now to talk to our loved ones about their assets, preserving our intergenerational wealth, getting a will, talking to our loved ones about where our money is. Do we own property? Where do we bank? Is there a life insurance policy? And there are certain things and tools that we can use to safeguard our family's assets, like the use of a trust. So really, it's so instrumental to the community in making sure that we have a surrogate who is going to put the community first. Because what happens is, if you do pass away without a will, the surrogate's court, through the public administrator's office, literally administers our estate as if they were our loved ones. So if you had a will, you would identify all of your assets, you'd write it down, you would identify who the beneficiaries would be, and you'd be able to say, well, you know what, I want my oldest child to be the executor. My oldest child is the most responsible. That's going to be the person who's going to have the authority to go to the bank, take the money out, use the money to help manage the affairs of the family, close out the estate until everything is transferred. But if you do not have a will, then the surrogate court, through that public administrator's office, actually gets the legal documents as if they were your loved ones. And they go to the bank, they manage your affairs. And so through that process, there's various vendors who are part of it. So you might have an attorney that's assigned by the court and who is administering the estate, but billing on the file. You'll have real estate appraisers who come in and say, well, you know what, the house is in disrepair, and value the house and appraise the house for less than what it actually is worth. And then you have the real estate developer or investor who comes in through maybe even an auction process and buys the house for even less than what the appraiser valued the house for. And all that remains gets into the hands of the family. And so that's how oftentimes our community's wealth is lost. And, when I think about surrogates court, I think about my mother and my father. They're Caribbean immigrants from Haiti who came to this country very poor, humble beginnings, but they were rich in faith, hope, and determination, and really the will to just work hard. Because of their work and sacrifice, I had an opportunity to go to school, go to law school, and become a judge. That is really what surrogates court is about. It's about legacy building. It's about the idea that one generation may start from poverty, and the next generation has a little head start in life. And the idea that even my children would have more than I had growing up. And so we really need to make sure that the surrogates court is working for the community, and that the community is not working for the surrogates court. I'm grateful to have the support and endorsement of so many labor unions. They really are our backbones. They're our essential workers, our frontline workers who kept Brooklyn moving forward during the pandemic. And so I know going into surrogates court who I'm fighting for.
Wow, you did like a remarkable job with explaining surrogate court. I just wanted you to clarify, because this is new to a lot of people, our listeners. So it's very important, as you said, to get a will and ideally a trust. However, even if you have a will and trust, you still have to go through
surrogates court, right?
Yes.
So people don't realize that. They figure, well, look, I have a will, so now I don't have to go to surrogates court at all. But it's not true. You do actually still have to go to surrogates court, because you have to do what's called probating the will. And probating the will essentially means that you're verifying the will. And so what happens is someone goes and files and they said, my family member passed away, there was a will, I'm filing the will, or perhaps the will was already filed in safekeeping with the surrogate's court, and the family member or potential heirs receive notice about the fact that this will is being probated through the court system. And so sometimes people may feel like they have a right to come in and object to the will. They might say, well, you know what? Mom wasn't in the best mental state when this will was created, or the will was modified, not too long before the person passed away. And so someone may come in and want to raise objections, but you're still empowering your family more so than if you did not have a will. And the idea is that if you have a will, you can identify who you want to have your assets. So you know what? You can decide to give your assets away to charity, to give it to the church. Or you can say, you know what? I'm going to give my assets to a family member. The only thing is, with a spouse, the law is a little different in New York. You cannot just disinherit your spouse unless that spouse signed off on a waiver before the person passed away. But ultimately, sometimes in our community, we don't get divorced. We may be separated. That other person is estranged. There is no dispute about that. Everyone in the community knows that spouse is not even disputing that they haven't been around for years. But if you don't get legally divorced, you'll still have to deal with the court laws in terms of giving that spouse who's still legally married to you some of your assets. If you don't have a will, then the court is going to rely on the New York State laws as it relates to inheritance and who should get your assets. So if you want real control over your assets, who gets it, preserving it, safeguarding it, then you do want to do estate planning.
Wow.
So the question is, awesome, love it. Why do we have to vote for you? What you're going to bring to this table as we think about?
So I think I'm bringing in, when you're looking for a judge and a surrogate court judge, you'd look at a few different components. One, always compassion. And I believe that compassion is typically born out of personal experiences. The idea that someone comes before the court, not wanting to come before the court, but understanding that life experiences has brought them to this time where they're before you, looking for justice, looking for equality, looking for their day in court and to be heard, and for a judge to have an open mind and really unbiased until all of the facts and evidence is before the court. And for me, my compassion is born out of my personal experiences as a young person going through the court system, watching my parents go through the court system. And I never forgot that experience. So I stayed active in the community, not just working as an attorney for clients, but doing pro bono work and creating workshops and programs in the community.
One of the things that you said to us is about your compassion. And that's important. Somebody who's sitting at the helm has compassion. And it sounds like you do have compassion. Yes. So that's where.
Yes, absolutely. That is instrumental, to make sure that you have a surrogate court judge who understands the community, understands the circumstances that brought that family, that person to the court system. And oftentimes that compassion is born out of your own personal experiences. Integrity is important, and making sure that there's a surrogate who's going to be working for the best interests of the community and not putting the community in a place where they're working in the best interests of the courts. And really having a watchful eye over the community. I understand from my own experiences what it was like for my parents to struggle to find justice through the court system and not really having true access. So I sat on Community Board 3. I was the director of community service for the Metropolitan Black Bar Association. And I put these programs together to make sure that we can really provide information and resources to bridge that gap. I continued that work even on the bench. I worked with the Office of Justice Initiative to create different programs and an advisory committee for the family court to find innovative ways to improve access to the courts and to justice. I'm going to bring that same zeal and community-centric approach to surrogates court.
So your election is county-wide, correct? Is it county-wide?
That's right. So it's countywide. So no matter where you live in Brooklyn, you'll find my name, Judge Dweynie Esther Paul, for surrogate on your ballot. And I will say that the judges matter. So it's a big election. The ballot will be long. It will be raining on Tuesday, they say. I'm willing the rain away. But it is so important that we focus in on our judges, because I will say, not too long ago, there was a court case, and we took to the streets to protest, to ensure justice and equality. But there was a judge that presided over that case, and there were a set of jurors. And if you feel like the outcome was just and fair, I believe it's because they knew that the community was watching, that the world was watching, and ensuring that justice would prevail. But it takes us to go to the ballot, to vote, to engage in our civic duty and our rights, because I will say that they are expecting for the community not to turn out and vote. But this is a huge election. We are talking about the mayor, city council, so many positions that are going to change the face of Brooklyn, change the face of New York City. But our judges matter. And usually the judges are placed at the back of the ballot. So take your time, go through it, vote for your judges, because judges certainly matter to ensure that we have justice in our community. So I'm asking for your support, Judge Dweynie Esther Paul for Kings County Surrogate Court.
That's correct. We are as strong as our weakest link. So as a community, we have to come together and go forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I say with this election that economic justice is on the ballot, our socioeconomic justice is on the ballot, and our family's legacy is on the ballot. So I encourage everyone to go out and vote. Early voting is underway. The election has already started. June 20th is the last day of early voting. And then June 22nd is the Democratic primary. Don't wait for November. The race is now. The election is now. Have your voices heard at the ballot.
Wonderful. We had another question. So the surrogate race is very important. And one of the complaints that we're hearing is that there's a backload of cases in surrogate court. If elected, what would you do about that?
Yes. So it is challenging, and the pandemic made matters worse, but there were serious delays even before the pandemic. I started in family court. We have high volume, fast-paced cases. Families come in, one case is resolved, settled, or trial determination, and the next month they're filing a violation or a modification. So I'm used to a high volume, fast-paced court where a lot of people are coming in pro se without attorneys. There are systems that we put in place that work to move our cases forward. There's standards and goals that we set in family court to monitor our cases, to review it every 6 months, the year mark, the 2-year mark, to find out why this case is still here. Why isn't it moving forward? When we're in family court, we can't afford for our cases to be lagged behind, because we're talking about domestic violence cases and really bringing safeguarding to families. In surrogates court, I'll bring that same approach, ways to move the cases along, case management, and having an oversight process that reviews the file to see why the case is still lingering. We also are understaffed in surrogates court, so real advocacy to make sure that we have the proper staffing to serve our community the way they deserve to be served.
Okay, thank you. Yes. That is awesome.
Yeah, and I guess the last question is, trust is very important in a judge. Why should the community trust you as the next surrogate judge?
I stand by my record. I've been a judge now for 6 years. Before I was a judge, I was a practicing attorney representing clients from all spectrum. I did all civil litigation work, represented small mom and pop businesses to large corporations, landlords to tenants. And I did it with the same level of advocacy, skill, commitment, no matter who my client was. getting into the court system, I made sure that I was working to strengthen families, bringing families together, watching families go through and tackle drug and alcohol abuse, and seeing that family through, seeing them reunified, and even strengthening our families through adoptions. The work I'm doing now in civil court, I'm working predominantly with mom and pop business owners and landlords who are mom and pop landlords who are relying on each other to get through this pandemic together. You know, my commitment has always been to the community. And that's the record I stand behind. I think that's why I have the support of so many labor unions. And I'll say it's a historic moment because typically labor unions do not engage in judicial races. But this time is different because of the pandemic. And so many of their members were so impacted by COVID-19. And they understand that their members need that court to transition and to keep their family legacies moving forward. And so, you know, I know who I'm going into that court to fight for, to make sure that they have equal access to justice.
I want to ask you something before we close because I'm getting something from my inner being, my inner man, and inner being. And what's coming to me, what does grace mean to you? What does grace mean to you?
Yeah. You know, when I was younger, I don't think I understood the full breadth of the word grace. I think it takes life challenges, experiencing other people's life challenges to understand what the Bible teaches about grace. And I hope I don't go too far off, but I grew up in the church. Sometimes you get exposed to the church later in life, but I grew up in the church. I've come to realize the full breadth of grace is the idea of understanding humanity, that people sometimes are really just doing the best that they can in that moment. And so if I fall short of meeting what I think God intended for me to do, the service that I'm intending to do for others, I ask God for grace, and God gives it. The idea of patience, forgiveness, compassion, real understanding, empathy. I think that's what grace is about. I think it's the understanding that people really genuinely are good and have good intentions. And so when life experience strikes them and they go through something negative, or they end up in a situation that they otherwise would not have desired or intended to, that someone is good enough to give them grace. I think that's so important in the court system. If you're talking about family court, if you're talking about criminal court, that idea that someone understands that this person stumbled along the way, and perhaps there needs to be some degree of retribution, some degree of making sure that they are repaying that debt or that shortcoming, but that grace is still there as a cushion to say, you know, I'm already down, don't push me lower. Give me that opportunity, that window, so that I can rise to the full potential of who God intended me to be. So I think that's what grace is about.
You're absolutely right. And I heard right from my spirit, and you answered it. Thank you. Thank you.
And the final question is rank voting. Does that apply to judgeships, the judge races?
Okay, so ranked choice voting does not apply to judges. What happened is judges are state positions. And so the ranked choice voting only applies to city positions. So you'll see the mayor, you'll see the city councils, and you'll hear about the ranked choice votings. But for the judges, we do not have that. It's a traditional way to vote. Only vote for one person. Judge Paul for Surrogate.
Right. Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Awesome.
And there was a question from the community because um, we're hearing things in the street in the community about conflict of interest. So we want to ask, do you have any conflict of interest with the developers? Because we did hear not about you, but maybe your competitor.
So it's important that the surrogate I mentioned before is going to put the community first and not be compromised by special interests. There has been a tremendous amount of resources, financial resources, poured into the candidacy against my candidacy. But you know what? I think about this movement, and movements are usually done by the people. And you may not have a tremendous amount of financial resources, but if you have the people behind you, you move mountains. And, at the end of the day, our ancestors have fought blood, sweat, and tears for the right to vote, right? Should have been a human right, but we had to fight for it. And still today, we're fighting for that right to vote. And that vote should be free. It's up to us to show up at the polls. It's up to us to honor our ancestors and the work that they did, the fight that they did to create this opportunity for our voices to be heard. We get to choose. We get to decide what Brooklyn looks like. We get to ensure that our legacies are preserved, but we have to get up and vote. The same way we took to the streets and protest, that's the same vigor. That's the same passion that we should hit the polls, stand on the lines, take advantage of early voting. Now is the time. Now is the time.
We, as a community, thank you for coming on to this platform, Anchored with Grace, and sharing your personal self with us, as well as the law and things that we should know, and how to understand it, commune with it. You have shared a lot with us, and we just want to applaud you for stepping onto our platform. And may God be with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity. The polls close. We have 30 minutes. The polls close at 8:00 tonight. There's still time.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.